that. Richard was very gracious because I have a reputation as a Disney historian, which is one of the reasons, again, I'm looking forward to seeing this presentation. I've seen it before. It is an outstanding presentation. I assume that one of the reasons that you're here is because on the side of this building is a huge banner with the 4 key drivers of Epcot, one of them being more knowledgeable cast members about the park. And today you are going to have a wonderful time travel experience. You have Dave Venables, who is General Manager of Epcot Operations, and John Kemp, who is Director of Epcot Region Engineering Services. But what is going to happen within this next hour is they are going to transform into 2 young cast members who were here at the opening of Epcot. And they will be sharing with you some outstanding, unique visuals that will amuse you, make you curious, and definitely educate you about the uniqueness of the Epcot park. But as I said, this is like carrying coals to Newcastle. At this particular point, let's welcome Dave and John with a big round of applause.
So we'll try to use this microphone for the benefit of the Resource Center. They're trying to put this on tape, so we'll see how it turns out and see if this experience can be helpful to other people who won't be able to come see it in person. John and I are very flattered by all the kind words. A few months ago, we were asked to pull something together on traditions and heritage in our company that we shared with the operations managers, and from that it led to a few more groups and a few more groups, and so we think, again, we're very honored and flattered to do this, so we think we'll probably do many more of these, maybe as often as once a month. A place where we can usually start is just a little bit about ourselves. I do think that a large part of the Disney company, I understand there's a lot of college program people in the room, managers and people from all walks of life, and that's really good because one of our strengths is the very diverse cast that we have at the Walt Disney World Company. And I think for those of you who are relatively new to the organization, we're proud to be the largest single site employer in the whole nation. So there's bigger companies, General Motors, General Electric, AT&T, there are bigger companies, but there are no companies that have a subsidiary or a Walt Disney World Company in one site here in Florida that have more cast members than we do, and we're probably somewhere around 55,000 cast members now in one place. So there's no other company in the country that has that many in one place. I think a starting place for us is to share a little bit about ourselves today, and I am Dave Venables, as I was so eloquently introduced, and I have been here. I'm not an original cast member from 1971. I actually came about a year later. 1972 is when I joined the company, and my first job was driving the ferry boat across the lake from the Transportation and Ticket Center over to the Magic Kingdom. So I was a boat operator, and really have had the fortunate experience of doing many things. I went from watercraft, I became a trainer, I became a lead or a foreman, went to the parking lot and drove trams, sold toll plaza tickets. I worked in the kennel for about a 6-month stint and scooped a lot of poop, is what I tell people, for a long time, keeping those kennel cages clean. And then I had the chance to move through the Magic Kingdom in every land I worked except for Fantasyland, but in all the other lands of the Magic Kingdom, and then went to guest relations. And an interesting story, again, I'll try to be quick. We're really trying to respect everybody's time and do this in an hour. But even in the years before Epcot opened, around 1980, it was about that time frame that I went to guest relations, and believe it or not, it's hard to even talk about things like this now, but believe it or not, I was the first male manager to ever be in guest relations, and that was 1980. There were 5 gentlemen in the department, and the whole department of like 120 people, it was all women, and that's just the way it was. So there was nothing very special about it, actually, but it was just curious that now, again, as the years pass, we get better and we get more diverse and we learn things about ourselves. So I have, kind of the fun of telling people that I was the first man to go be the manager of guest relations, or a manager in guest relations. Spent a quick stint in human resources for 5 years, and now I've been back to Epcot since 1994 as the general manager. So it's been a great time. Really enjoy it. And now let me quit talking, which I could do for probably about 10 hours, and I'll let John do it.
Hello, as introduced, I'm John Kemp, Director of Engineering Services. My career with Disney hasn't been quite as artsy and showy as Dave's has. I've been kind of on the maintenance side of the house since day one, and I was here day one. I started in January of '71 as a model maker mold maker in the staff shop. What, you asked, does a model maker mold maker do? Makes models and molds. The thing I did was using polyurethane foams. Made a lot of the little rosettes you see on Main Street, the molding you see in the Hall of Presidents, those kinds of things. So I did that for just under a year and transferred to decks in the Magic Kingdom Tunnel in September of '71 and did 10 years in decks. And what does one do in decks? Well, I was an electronics technician to begin with, and then later became systems engineer, department head, manager, et cetera, those kinds of things. Transferred to the Epcot project development team. Just about the same time Dave went to guest relations, I believe, around 1981. We opened Epcot in October of '82. I did 5 years here, and then transferred to the studio project development team. We opened the studio in May of '89, did 5 years there, and came back to Epcot in February of '94, and I have been here since. So I'm one of the day one original dirt type people, so not that we know it all, but we've seen quite a bit of it. The way we're going to start today is there's a film that was put together back in 1968 with Walt, and it's more or less his vision of what the Florida property is all about. How many of you know Marty Sklar? Okay, Marty's first involvement with the Florida property was to script this film. The film in its entirety is 25 minutes. We've pulled out about 10 minutes of that. So we'll run that now and let you take a look at it.
Here in Florida, we have something special we never enjoyed at Disneyland, the blessing of science. There's enough land here to hold all the ideas and plans we could possibly imagine. Right now, our plans include an airport of the future down here in Osceola County, an entrance complex where all visitors will enter Disney World, an industrial park area covering about 1,000 acres, and of course, the theme park area way up here. And all these varied activities around the Disney World will be tied together by a high-speed, rapid transit system running almost the full length of the property. But the most exciting, by far the most important part of our Florida project, in fact, the heart of everything we'll be doing in Disney World, will be our experimental prototype city of tomorrow. We call it Epcot, spelled E-P-C-O-T, Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow. Here it is in larger scale. Epcot will take its cue from the new ideas and new technologies that are now emerging from the creative centers of American industry. It will be a community of tomorrow that will never be completed, but will always be introducing and testing and demonstrating new materials and new systems. And Epcot will always be a showcase to the world for the ingenuity and imagination of American free enterprise. I don't believe there's a challenge anywhere in the world that's more important to people everywhere than finding solutions to the problems of our cities. But where do we begin? How do we start answering this great challenge? Well, we're convinced we must start with the public need. And the need is not just for curing the old ills of old cities. We think the need is for starting from scratch on virgin land and building a special kind of new community. So that's what Epcot is. an experimental prototype community that will always be in a state of becoming. It will never cease to be a living blueprint of the future, where people actually live a life they can't find anywhere else in the world. Everything in Epcot will be dedicated to the happiness of the people who will live, work, and play here, and those who come here from all around the world to visit our living showcase. We don't presume to know all the answers. In fact, we're counting on the cooperation of American industry to provide their very best thinking during the planning and the creation of our experimental prototype community of tomorrow. And most important of all, when Epcot has become a reality and we find the need for technologies that don't even exist today, it's our hope that Epcot will stimulate American industry to develop new solutions that will meet the needs of people expressed right here in this experimental community. Well, that's our basic philosophy for Epcot. By now, I'm sure you're wondering how people will actually live and work and move around in our community of tomorrow. So in the next few minutes, we'll go into detail about some of our preliminary sketches and layouts. Remember though, as I said earlier, this is just the beginning. And with that thought in mind, let's have a look.
No city of today will serve as the guide for the city of tomorrow. Epcot will be a planned environment, demonstrating to the world what American communities can accomplish through proper control of planning and design. Epcot begins with an idea new among cities built since the birth of the automobile. We call it the radio plan. Picture a wheel. Like the spokes of the wheel, the city fans out along a series of radials from a bustling hub at the center of Epcot. A network of transportation systems radiate from this central hub, carrying people to and from the heart of the city. These transportation systems circulate to and through 4 primary spheres of activity surrounding the central core. First, the area of business and commerce. Next, the high-density apartment housing. Then the broad green belt and recreation lands. And finally, the low-density neighborhood residential streets. Epcot's dynamic urban center will offer the excitement and variety of activities found only in metropolitan cities: cultural, social, business, and entertainment. Among its major features will be a cosmopolitan hotel and convention center, towering 30 or more stories. Shopping areas, where stores and whole streets recreate the character and adventure of places round the world. Theaters for dramatic and musical productions. Restaurants, and a variety of nightlife attractions. And a wide range of office buildings, some containing services required by Epcot's residents, but most of them designed especially to suit the local and regional needs of major corporations. But most important, this entire 50 acres of city streets and buildings will be completely enclosed. In this climate-controlled environment, shoppers and theater goers and people just out for a stroll will enjoy ideal weather conditions, protected day and night from rain, heat and cold, and humidity. Let's look at another view of Epcot's transportation hub and see how traffic flows through the heart of the city on 3 separate levels. At this central station in the industrial complex, passengers disembark from the monorail and again board Wedway cars that radiate to each facility. This industrial complex will provide employment for many people who live in Epcot. But it will mean much more, not only for this community, but also for American industry. Here, the Disney staff will work with individual companies to create a showcase of industry at work. In attractive park-like settings, the 6 million people who visit Disney World each year will look behind the scenes at experimental prototype plants, research and development laboratories, and computer centers for major corporations. So this is Epcot, the heart of Disney World. In other parts of the country, a community the size of this prototype could become part of an entire city complex composed of many such communities, planned and built a few miles apart. In Disney World, about 20,000 people will actually live in Epcot. Their homes will be built in ways that permit ease of change, so that new products may continuously be demonstrated. Their schools will welcome new ideas, so that everyone who grows up in Epcot will have skills in pace with today's world. Epcot will be a working community with employment for all. And everyone who lives here will have a responsibility to help keep this community an exciting, living blueprint of the future. And now here again is Walt Disney.
That's the starting point for our experimental prototype community of tomorrow. And now, where do we go from these preliminary plans and sketches? Well, a project like this is so vast in scope that no one company alone can make it a reality. But if we can bring together the technical know-how of American industry and the creative imagination of the Disney organization, I'm confident we can create right here in Disney World a showcase to the world of the American free enterprise system. I believe we can build a community that more people will talk about and come to look at than any other area in the world. And with your cooperation, I'm sure this experimental prototype community of tomorrow can influence the future of city living for generations to come. It's an exciting challenge, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for everyone who participates. Speaking for myself and the entire Disney organization, we're ready to go right now.
Different bits and pieces. I guess one thing that we didn't talk about today is we're just going to start with Epcot. That's what John and I are going to talk about. Jim does a great presentation on years before that, and you can start almost anywhere you want in the whole century. So we decided to start with this. But when you think about, Walt died of lung cancer shortly after this was made, and was not even here when Walt Disney World opened, that there are parts of that that are amazingly accurate, about we'll have whole streets depicting cities around the world and everything. And all we still hope for is to get that weather dome.
One thing I would like to mention, the film, when it was produced with three audiences in mind. One, as Walt indicated, American industry, to try to get participants. Second was for the folks in the state of Florida. This was shown at the Preview Center on Preview Boulevard. The Preview Center is currently where the AAU resides. And then thirdly, for the folks at the Disney company itself. I'd like to read something, if I could, real fast, which is kind of pertinent to what we're talking about here. This is the conclusions to a summary. It says, Walt Disney World goals are essential to successful operation and can be met. This is produced by a potential participant. An advanced electronic information communication system is vital to the realization of these goals. The proposed system will result in more efficient and economical operations. At the same time, it will provide guests with an array of new services designed to enhance Disney's existing high standards of guest services. The system will not just reduce costs, but contribute in a positive way to profits. The system will serve as a prototype of Epcot's information communication system requirements. RCA, with the continued close collaboration of the Disney organization, can implement the proposed system to meet the October 1971 opening. This is a document that was put together by RCA as a potential participant with the Epcot project. And I thought it was interesting that a lot of what we talked about in '68 is still pertinent today. I was with RCA at that time. A little insider information there. What we've got now is some slides, and I guess I'll step over to this other mic. Is this one hot? Yeah. And what we're going to do now is show you some of the earlier artist renderings of what the concept Epcot or concept property looked like back then. I think this does it. Yeah. Okay. This is the grand overview that was in the Walt film. A little bit closer. picture of that. And this was also in the film you just saw. This was the proposed concept of what future world, or what was later known as future world, would look like. And this was the early concept of World Showcase. Now the neat thing about this, if you'll notice, each of the storefronts for each nation are the same size. From a promenade standpoint or from a guest visit standpoint, everything looks the same. The only difference would be the identification of the signage, et cetera, designating which nation that was. But this was Walt's way of making all nations look equal. So everybody had an equal front. But in depth, depending on the size of the show or ride, they were all, various sizes. Also, one neat thing about this concept, the main entrance was right here. So World Showcase originally was going to be the park. And then, well, this is an aerial view of the same rendering you just saw, and you can see the differences in the different nation building sizes here, the depths. This was what later became known as Future World. Back then it was called Future World Theme Center. It was broken down into different quadrants: communications, the community, science and technology, and each of those bore a close resemblance of what Communicore currently looks like. Science and technology, which really now is the land and living seas outside of Future World. This is an early model, probably somewhere in the late 70s vintage of the Epcot project. And you can see most of it is fairly well representative of what is currently here, although some of the positions might have changed. That would be seas. This would be land in the Imagination Complex. World of Motion. That eventually became Wonders of Life. I don't know what it was in this particular concept. Universe of Energy, and then the World Showcase. American Adventure wasn't a part of it at that time because they didn't quite know how to treat the American Pavilion. This is an early concept of what Living Seas, Sea Base Alpha would look like, and fairly similar to what's there now from a look through the window type view of an underwater habitat. This is a model of the seas. Here again, this is probably late 70s. The go-ahead to do Epcot, and there's a long history of will we, won't we, can we, should we do Epcot. The go-ahead was granted by corporate in January of 75. The planning has been ongoing since obviously 1968, or even earlier. But because of several things that occurred during the first part of the 70s, for instance, what we call the energy crisis back in 1973. 73, 74 were pretty bad years for the company. Stock got down, and there's been at least 4 splits since then, but the pre-split price of the stock got down to $16 a share. That was in January of 74. So will we do Epcot? Won't we do Epcot? There was a lot of deliberation going. Finally, like I said, in January of 75, corporate said, go for it. And from that point forward, during the business updates, these renderings would be shown to the people attending those updates, and this is what we saw Epcot was going to be. This is an outside view of Living Seas, and looks almost just like the real thing. Inside the Living Seas, the dive tube, which is currently decommissioned but soon to be recommissioned, the dive tube actually laced throughout the pavilion in the original concept. Obviously, from a cost standpoint, from a guest perspective standpoint, that's great, but it's also very expensive. Is it feasible? You're subjecting yourself to, we had one, quote, semi-disaster with the dive tube as it was. If we had it laced throughout the building, we would have to replace the entire thing. So what you see, the vertical run, I'm pointing at this screen, you can't see that. This vertical run is what's currently employed in the dive tube configuration and will be after next January. Yes, it is coming back. Universe of Energy. Here again, in concept, it very closely approximates what is reality. World of Motion, a little different here. The little more flowery building than what we wound up with in the stainless steel structure that's out there. World of Motion eventually, as you know, became Test Track, which it is now. So near and dear to our hearts from a maintenance standpoint. But at any rate, you can see the resemblance from concept to reality also in this facility. This was, and this is a piece of history that you folks are actually going to be able to tell your grandkids about. This is one of the early concepts on what was called, it had 2 or 3 different working names, Future Probe 2000, Century something, I forget what it was. Eventually it became Horizons. So this was the concept for what is now Horizons, and as you all know, Horizons is now on its way out. One of the first, actually the first, total demolition of a Florida property. And this is the site in the early days of construction, and I think I'll turn it over to Mr. Venables now.
A couple of interesting things that John, in showing you what he has so far, he pointed out several models, and he said he started as a model maker. And one story I like to tell is how technology has changed what we can do. As all of you, I'm sure, know, we're tearing down the Horizons building. John and I were there to help dedicate the dadgum thing, and now they're tearing it down. Well, what's interesting is in the old days, they'd build these WDI would build these very extravagant scale models that you would, in order to see sight lines and everything, you'd have all the executives around the table, you know, looking through different parts of a model and everything to see what it would look like. On a very recent trip out for the new space pavilion that we'll be building where Horizons is being torn down, technology, of course, virtual technology is with us now. So they took us into a room, and you can stand with virtual goggles on, and they can say, okay, there's Horizons. Okay, remove Horizons and put the space pavilion there, and you can look right out and see exactly what it's going to look like. There's a plan to have part of the monorail beam possibly go out between where Wonders of Life and Space will be. And they can also like take out the current monorail beam, plop in the new monorail beam, and you can just see all of that. So technology has really helped us do things faster, quicker, better, and probably more accurately than with all of these models. So we'll try to talk through a few of these slides. What you'll be able to see is actually, I'm going to stab myself with this thing. Where's the button? Which one? All right. So, yeah, I'd hate to like laser somebody. You'll see Epcot really come to life under construction. You can see out here some of the parking lot areas as we got. You can see the lagoon, which was dug out, starting to come under construction. This, again, is early laydown area. This actually is some of the employee parking lot areas out here that as Epcot first started to get developed. This is what we call Woodpecker Lane. As you come in toward the guard shack, that little road out to the right that goes to the parking lot is called Woodpecker Lane. And some of you, I'm sure, know this, but some of you don't. That the reason it got its name is we actually had to put that big jog in the road and move the whole road over because there were, as we were under construction, they discovered that there were some sort of protected type of species of woodpeckers that by law we couldn't be within so many hundreds of feet of them. So we had to move this whole row around, and so that became Woodpecker Lane. This is the beginnings of the buildings as they go up. And this one, John, is Spaceship Earth with all the legs on it. And the footings on this went so far into the ground. One thing, this building will never blow away. We know that. So this is the early days of Spaceship Earth. This one, World of Motion, starting up, early days again. We'll keep going. Further sight, as it continued to go up, you can see the walls going up on this one. More of World of Motion, the skin of it and all of that as it went up. And the other interesting thing as we were under construction, we got a little further along than this as the site continued to go up. We did here you can see pieces of the monorail beam going in, and you see big gaps where it's not completed yet as it came into Epcot to get ready to go around. We did a couple of things historically that are neat. The park is now called Epcot. When it opened, it was called Epcot Center, and we had all the cast being sure to say Epcot Center. And we always do a preview center, and actually on Main Street we did have, it was awkward to say at first, and then it just over the months rolled off your tongue. We had the Epcot Center Preview Center, and that was on a big sign on Main Street. I mean, that's actually what it was, because the project was called Epcot Center, and this was the preview center for the Epcot Center. So we used to do that. And then as the project came along, there was such interest worldwide in this project. It was on the cover of every magazine, you know, media was anxious. So while it was under construction and the monorail beam finally got completed to the main entrance, we were able to bring guests from the Magic Kingdom out on a tour to just look at it under construction. It was still dirt, it was still buildings, there were still construction guys in hard hats, and there was such demand that people would come out on the monorail and just look out. We didn't let them go any further than the monorail station and look out on the project and see all of this being built. Here is another one, just as it continues to develop a little bit closer in. The monorail beam is almost complete there, a couple of gaps in it, and you see the Energy Pavilion and also the World of Motion Pavilion. This is just a really beautiful shot of Spaceship Earth in the evening. There it is as it goes further. This was the flag topping ceremony. You can see the guys up on top putting the flag as they finally put the top piece of the frame onto Spaceship Earth. And these are the panels, the Lucabon panels, and how they went up with a big crane in place. And each one, this was like putting the pieces of a puzzle together. Each one fits perfectly to make that spherical shape. More of the, just another shot, as these are progressive. So as it went further along, you can see Future World here, the monorail loop, Imagination, land off to the right. And this was the surcharge for the Seas Pavilion. Seas was not here when Epcot opened, and there was going to be, as there is, so much weight there that we actually piled up a big mound of earth. It's called a surcharge. It's a construction technique that has to sit there for so many years to become part of the land and really press the ground down very hard. This is rather a neat shot. This is the land without a roof on it. So here's the boat ride going right down here as it was built. So you can see the flume where the boats go in the land, and it's just before the roof was completed. So here's the greenhouses, here's the fish, and right on through. So that's pretty fascinating, I think. This is, again, a shot nearly completed. This is, again, Living Seas over here. That's not completed, and then Spaceship Earth.
The very beginning of Living Seas construction.
Yeah, just in the early days. And so is this. I think these next few shots are, again, continuing of the Living Seas. If I stand back, will you click the buttons for me? I'm having a hard time seeing that close up.
The unique thing here is it is up, the park is open. This is
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. This is all now behind construction walls. And so we built the Living Seas after Epcot was open and running. You can see out in the parking lot, there's, cars and all of that. Okay. Another site, same thing, just a massive, massive project. This is early days with Seas under construction. You can see Imagination way up in the background. We're definitely open. The park is running, and the construction wall just blocking everything off so you can't see it. It looks like it does today.
Easy
almost.
Easy come, easy go.
Easy come, easy go. So this is the Horizons under construction in the early days. Okay, thanks.
Note the construction fence, though. It's just a typical construction fence, nothing fancy like we have now.
Right. And this is back in World Showcase. This is actually UK. And so you can see, here's the pub and here's where the tables are outside next to the little waterway. Off to the right of this picture is the lagoon, and here is the promenade that would walk right by the United Kingdom under construction. I don't know what this is. Oh, this is Italy. This is Italy. There's the tower, the frame of the tower right there. So this is the Italy pavilion and facing the lagoon. So there's the Tower of Italy being built.
One thing you might point out, Dave, is the lagoon being empty.
Yeah, we were digging it. There's no water in it. This is, of course, a man-made lagoon right
Getting
here.
all the muck out and hauling the sand in.
This shot is it's a distance shot, so it's just a little distorted of Spaceship Earth, but it's able to show, you know, just how large Epcot was under construction and what a massive project. Actually, it was budgeted at $800 million, and it went to $1 billion investment before we were done.
This structure down here is France, and that's what eventually became the International Gateway.
And this building right here is Canada, and there's the Circle Vision, and in the early days of Canada being under construction. And there's a great site. And what this does, what's important about this, is the parking lot's full. We're open. We're having a pretty good business, and the sky shot shows you all the open sites around the lagoon, and some of them are still there. So in this site, the Norway Pavilion isn't here yet, but there are still, this is where Magic Music Days ended up. So there are still sites around World Showcase where if more countries want to come in and be developed, they can. We have room. You know, from the guest side of it, it looks like we don't, because it looks very beautiful and it looks crowded. But as soon as you kind of peek through the trees, you can see that there are open plots of land, and we would have room for a few more pavilions around World Showcase if there were countries who wanted to be represented, and we felt that it was good for Epcot to have representation from those particular places. We would do that. This is interesting because of the line. You can just see the demand on the buildings when we first opened. Like, this is a line into the Imagination Pavilion going all the way out. And the other thing you can see that's pretty neat is look at this line from the land coming out. And when was the last time you saw a line from the land all the way to the breezeway? So that's the kind of demand there was in the early days of Epcot when we first opened it. So it was very long lines everywhere. Here's the line outside the Universe of Energy Pavilion. Not too many lines like that anymore. We even had lines coming into the Toll Plaza, which we don't anymore, except 4th of July and New Year's Eve. And again, this is just another shot of the high demand going into the Land Pavilion. This is interesting because this is a corner shot of the American Adventure. When the American Adventure first opened, this is the seating area that's now enclosed. It was all outdoors before. So when we first opened, it wasn't air conditioned, it wasn't inside. That was an add-on later. So the whole of the American Adventure food area was just outdoors. So I see a lot of people nodding their heads who do remember or recalling some of that. What's now Innoventions was called Communicore East and West, and you can tell how old these shots are by the clothing styles that people are wearing. This was a very neat concept. These were the dolls, World Showcase dolls, that we had at opening. So these are, of course, representative of the United Kingdom. These dolls were maybe 9 to 12 feet tall as they were on the promenade. This is a doll representing the American Adventure. We had all sorts of ideas about parades, entertainment, what it would look like, and at one time we thought about having a regular parade around the promenade and didn't. So the dolls would just come out and interface with our guests. This is early, World Showcase Entertainment Group. I want to stop here for a moment and just tell a story to remind everybody of. When Epcot opened in 1982, there was a great push by our then CEO, Card Walker, to assure that Epcot would be different from the Magic Kingdom. And so early on, there was an understanding that there would be no Disney characters in this park at all, none. So when it opened on October 1st, 1982, that was the one and only day that Mickey Mouse was there with Roy Disney as it was dedicated. Card Walker was there, and Mickey helped dedicate it that morning. And from that day on, there were no characters, not Mickey, Minnie, Donald Duck, Goofy, and the gang. None of them were there. And in fact, people don't really remember, there was no characters merchandise sold. There was no plush. There was no hats. You could not buy a Mickey Mouse t-shirt in Epcot because we were so determined to make it different from the Magic Kingdom. So we worked that way all the way till 1984, fall of 1984. And that's the same date that Michael Eisner and Frank Wells came aboard our company. And on an early walkthrough with Michael Eisner and his family, as we were going through Epcot, I was the guest relations manager at the time, and he was being hosted by our senior executive vice president, and I was making sure they had ice water and umbrellas. And after about 90 minutes in the park, he said to Dick Nunes, who was the president of Walt Disney Attractions at the time, he said, "Dick, I haven't seen any characters here like I did in the Magic Kingdom." And Dick began to explain, "Yes, sir, that's correct, Michael. There are no characters here." And he had a look, like when you look at somebody like, "Are you crazy?" And within weeks after that, we started all these costumes that are here. This was the first change that Michael Eisner made to impact the parks. He felt it was very important that we have characters properly themed in all the pavilions. So it was more than 2 years after we were there before the first shot of Spaceship Mickey, then this one of Mickey at Canada. There's more here, I think. Well, these characters were all added because all of these Disney characters, Mary Poppins shows up, Chip and Dale show up at China. And we had Spaceship Mickey, Spaceship Goofy, Pluto, and Outer Space, all of these things. And there's Farmer Mickey. We've themed Mickey everywhere. Another interesting thing that we did is this is the inauguration that was frozen out in Washington, D.C. For President Reagan. And so this is a shot in front of the American Adventure. That booth, if I can find the right button and not kill myself here, that booth right there is an air-conditioned, bulletproof booth that we put the president on to view these parades. And some of you aren't old enough to remember, but it was so cold in Washington, D.C., the inauguration was frozen out. It was canceled because it was so bitter cold. And so that summer, we said, we'll host the inauguration for you. So we brought the president here. There he is in the glass house that we built for him with Dick Nunes, our former president of attractions, on the water. He went upstairs and met the fellowship students from the American Adventure. He shook hands with all the fellowships. So this is in the VIP lounge upstairs at the American Adventure. We've had many presidents here. Here's President Ford that came to visit the park in front of the Land Pavilion. President Nixon here with Figment, Dreamfinder. And this is an out-of-place shot, maybe, of the seas and a diver in the seas, and it's not President Nixon.
You can't see that right now.
All right. Let's see if we're almost out. Another one.
This sequence got turned around.
Some of you, we have had the dive tube out of commission for about a year now, and a piece of the plexiglass actually broke out of it. And so we have it in plan work next year to put it all back together and have the dive tube again. Yes. Were you working there? My shoes are still wet from that morning.
And funny thing is, I was speaking to one of the divers, and she was supposed to dive like about a half an hour.
Right. We were very lucky. We were always very lucky. But boy, that dive tube, it put a lot of water on the floor. And then this is the, of course, the infamous fountain at the land. And the important thing about this slide is the roof. If you look at the ceiling, rather, of this and how it's all, there's a mural and it's painted very beautifully. And now we've painted the ceiling in one color, and there are instead are banners. There's no banners in this shot, and now we have banners. So the roof of the land, or the ceiling of the land, has changed very much. This is Kitchen Cabaret, if any of you remember that. Veggie, fruit, right? Yeah. So
There he is.
There he is. All right. And this is the outside of imagination, the upside down fountain, the dream tunnel. Yeah, rainbow tunnel. And this is the bird and the robot. This was a show. We're doing good on time. Just checking our time. We're doing pretty good here. This bird and the robot show was the post-show of the General Motors World of Motion ride. And it was very interactive, and a bird would talk with a robot. And it really got a good crowd. It was a cute show. Early animation. Another early shot of an idea of what it was going to look like.
This was the finale of the World of Motion ride. This is called Center
Yeah,
Court.
right here.
This is the Universal Energy Color Scheme.
Yeah, just a couple of things to note on here. We've painted it a different color. Mirrors on the back side. These mirror tiles are so hard to maintain that we've taken them off the back now, and they're just toward the front, and we've painted it differently. So Epcot is changing every year that goes by. This is Earth. This is inside Spaceship Earth after the ride, the post-show, and it was called Earth Station. And this is the World Key Information Network, where people went in and used touch-tone screens to get information. And there they are, and it was developed, it was called World Key, and it was developed for information. And another good side story is, within just a couple of weeks of opening Epcot, on day one, all of Epcot was open, World Showcase and Future World at the same time, and people were so anxious to eat in Italy and France and Germany, and they were so worried, there was such high demand again, and they were so worried they wouldn't get a reservation. People would, as soon as the turnstiles opened, people would run. And so you'd see people like me running like to Germany, and then they'd get there, and if the time and table they wanted wasn't there, then they'd have to run to France. And so really quickly, the director of the park called me and said, Dave, we have to do reservations here in Earth Station. And we just set up tables like within a few days, and in front of each person we had Germany, France, Italy, and all of the different countries you could eat at, because we were afraid somebody was going to have a heart attack running first thing down to World Showcase. So this is Earth Station. That's where guest relations was when Epcot was built. This is the Astuder Computer Review. It was a show. DAC Central is still there. Those people were really working in there. They were really on show. That was a concept like we're working and people are walking by watching us work.
What was it called after Astuder Computer? Right. What's it called then? Interventions.
And this one, Epcot Outreach, was just for those guests who wanted very in-depth information about hydroponics or whatever it might be, could go here. It was very underutilized. That's why we don't have it anymore. This was in the Communicor's Energy Exchange by Exxon. And this was AT&T, I think, started some of the information fountain and things. Yep. More of the Communicor. I keep saying Interventions, but that's what it is now. So it's all Communicor. And there's something by Bell Systems in Communicor. A lot of exhibits. This one was called FutureCom. This was what is now Mouse Gears. It was the Centaurium. And so you can see there was an upstairs and a downstairs. Now there isn't. You can see walking along the windows was really a corridor at the time. Later it all became shop. So right now the whole thing is the store and it's on one floor. This one is, what was it called? Electronic Forum.
Future Choice Theater.
It's all gone now. It's hard to remember, but the Electronic Forum was a show where we could go in and actually pull people. You had a button on your next to your chair, and you could say, okay, if you think this, press number 4. If you think this, press number 3. And we could really take some good polls in there. It just was not very popular, and it was hard to manage.
We sold those chairs to Would You Like to Be a Millionaire?
Yeah. This was Smart One, and it was an early type of robot that could interface with children and kind of have voice recognition. In the next slide, I think you'll see him surrounded by kids talking on a phone, and he would kind of ask yes/no questions, and he could figure out what animal it was that you were talking about that way. So it was a cute show.
Very extensive vocabulary. You recognize yes, no.
No, yeah. Early voice recognition. And this goes back to the theater that we were just talking about.
Person of the century?
Yeah, that was outside that. And another shot of a Studer computer.
Pretty sure.
Yep. And same thing, the image of walking on the internet. Yep, backstage magic.
Julie.
The prism in front of Spaceship Earth. It was very beautiful, as you can see. It was very beautiful and colorful when we first opened, and then over the years it yellowed. It turned, just due to the sun, the acrylic and everything yellowed, and so we were very blessed to have. It just came out with the opening of the Millennium Celebration. We did construction, but it was there all that time. And this is of course, the Future World Fountain without the stage or anything built yet. All of that was not there originally. And then this is just another good shot of the lagoon and the support buildings in the back. Yeah, it is kind of interesting. This is the employee parking lot, and these two trailers right over there, I mean, they were built for construction. And the first director of the park, Bill Sullivan, was in a corner office there, and they were due to go away at the end of when Epcot opened. And gosh, it's almost 20 years, and they're still there. This is, again, kind of as we get toward the end of this presentation, this is about heritage and tradition. And this is Walt Disney's passport. And there's a couple of interesting things. John Kemp and I were able, as we pulled this together, we went out to California to look at the archives, and this is there, and I took this shot with an electronic camera. And so what's interesting about it is on the next one, I got to back up a little bit. And on this passport, the story is that Walt Disney was born in 1901, and that doesn't look clear enough, John, to be able to see it today. But actually, with his mother's permission, Walt Disney changed the date on his passport application. He changed the 1 into a 0, so it would appear that he was born in 1900 instead of 1901, because his older brother, Roy, was in France fighting in World War I. And it was 1917. He was in France, and Walt wanted to go fight, and he wasn't old enough. But he found out that if you were 17 years old, you could drive an ambulance. And so with his mom's permission, he changed the year. He became from 16 to 17 overnight. He enlisted into the service and went to France and became an ambulance driver during World War I. So I think it says something about the character of the man. One of the other things we always hear about with Walt Disney is the multiplane camera that this company invented, and it was used for many, many, many years to do our great animation movies that we did, all the way starting with Snow White and through the years until computers and et cetera have taken over. So this is a shot. The original multiplane camera is there in California outside the archives, and you can probably, what you will see is that this camera is really in good condition, and it holds up much better than human beings do. The person standing next to it is me. In the next shot, there's a person standing next to it, and that's John. But again, if you look at what good shape the camera is in, you'll see that it's holding up much better than John and I did through the years. That camera is older than us, and it looks a heck of a lot better. This is our former vice president, George Kalogridis, in the early days. And what's interesting about this is at the bottom, right there, 001. That is the first ticket that was ever printed for Epcot. So that is the very first Epcot one-day ticket. Nothing has changed in some respects. As we were opening Epcot, we had an awful lot of job openings that we were having a tough time filling. And so this is out of an early eyes and ears, and this could have been yesterday, couldn't it? It absolutely could have been yesterday. These are some early executives. That's Bill Sullivan, Bruce LaValle, Norm Durges. Who's that one, John?
Bill Kemp.
Yep, they helped develop and build Epcot. The first eyes and ears, Epcot is open. On the front was a picture of Epcot, and on the back was Walt Disney. It was a double cover. This is in California. We have Team Disney here, so do they. That building is called Team Disney in California. You can see the dwarfs of the columns holding it up. And it's, quite amazing. And this courtyard has Disney legends, and the plaques along the side of the wall are handprints of Disney legends, different people. And there's some Florida executives that are Disney legends. And there's also Dick Van Dyke, various movie stars on it also. So I think that that's kind of what we wanted to cover today, is to talk a little bit about the history of Epcot. John has, I think, some fun trivia to help, to go back in time a little bit about what's the names of some things and maybe even what the tickets prices
What was the
were.
the 3D movie over in Imagination at opening? No, Magic Journeys. Followed by Captain EO. Right.
And if I can just take off on the Captain EO thing with Michael Jackson, he is a great avid Disney fan, and many times after we put in Captain EO, we would bring Michael Jackson in, and he wanted to experience the film with people and see what the reaction was people. So we'd sneak him in a show as the lights went off, and then we'd load the theater all around him, and he'd just be down in his chair, and we'd load the theater all around him, and most of the time, people sitting immediately, like 2 seats away, didn't even know he was there. And so then he could sit there and see the reaction. And that film was here a long time. And so actually in the later years, he would say, boy, I wish we could get rid of that, because he had changed so much. He was just such a young man in the film.
Who remembers the name of the first nighttime spectacular on the lagoon? Nope, that was the second one. The first one was called A New World Fantasy, opened in June of '83, and it was essentially a floating slideshow. Slides were viewed on water screens. And then Laserphonic Fantasy came in '85. What else? Horizons opened in 1983. It's been torn down in 2000. The Living Seas opened in '86. That was 2 years after Michael and Frank came on board. Frank actually donned diver's gear and was a part of the opening ceremony with Mickey, Underwater Mickey. Morocco, we opened in September of '84. And then everybody's favorite, Kaleidoscope. You remember that? That was in the fall of '85. That was the airplane traffic over the lagoon. There was a funny name everybody used for it, but I can't remember that. Does everybody remember the Daredevil Spectacular Circus? And with the Communicore Fountain.
For those of you who don't remember that, it was a circus. We had elephants in Future World. We had motorcycles ride up a cable from the ground to the top of Spaceship Earth. It was unbelievable. It was a real circus. And it's so now, again, as you learn and change, it's out of theme now. We just would not do a circus anymore. But it was amazing, the different things that have been done here. That would be a fun slide to add to this presentation, in fact.
It was one season, actually.
About a year, something like that?
Not quite a full year. One thing, and I don't have the exact date, but there was a copy of Eyes and Ears that came out pre-1989 that indicated Wonders of Life, or the Health Pavilion and the Space Pavilion would open in 1989. Obviously, the space hasn't quite gotten there yet, but we did, in fact, open Wonders of Life in 1989, same year as the studio opened. And that's probably all of the fun facts I have time for right now.
So we would like to thank all of you just for your time. Again, I said at the beginning, we're flattered. We're happy to do it. This is a company about relationships. So if any of you are planning careers, thinking, wow, this is a place I'd like to work, it's a great place to build careers. I think we're still just on the tip of the iceberg. I never dreamed when I started here in the Magic Kingdom that there would one day be 4 parks. You never even can imagine the growth, and yet we still have so much land. We're still continuing to grow an awful lot. I think what makes our company different is that we're a first name company. The chairman of the board comes here, and to all of us, people will stop him and shake his hand and say, Michael, how are you? And that makes this really different. So it's a company about relationships, and somehow it's a company about heritage and history, and we have to try to remember the kind of the genius of Walt Disney and some of the things that he had noted and thought of years and years before we even developed this. So thank you very much. We really appreciate your time, and we hope you have a great day.